Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Colin Pillai, and today for my physics project, I created a fluidized bed. Now, a fluidized bed is a container that contains a lot of small particulates. These particulates have air forced through the bottom and sometimes through the sides to allow space between the particles. Because of this new added space, the particles can now move a lot more freely than they could have before, and they will mimic a liquid instead of the normal solid that they usually do. Now, this is used in several industries, including painting and farming. In painting, it's used in what's called powder coating, where an object can be submerged into this powderized paint, and then it can be pulled out and shaken off of all the excess. They don't use any more than they need to, and they don't use any less. It's very efficient. In farming, it's used for grain silos, where air is forced through the bottom and somewhat through the sides to make the grain flow much more easily and prevent any getting stuck. Now, the one that I'm going to be creating is made of sand, and it's very simple, but this actually proves something in pop culture that's kind of like been plaguing people, and that's actually Scrooge McDuck's coin vault. How can he dive into it when it's just like a beach of sand? It'd be a solid surface at that point. Well, this will show you how. Now, I'm going to show you guys my building process of it, and a bit of trial and error in getting it to work, probably more error than trial. And then you'll be able to play with my product and my end result. And yeah, so let's get to it. So the first thing I do is lay out my materials. I'm going to be using 2 buckets to basically make the entirety of this. I've got a reciprocating saw, a box cutter, some sandpaper, some zip ties, some material, which I'll bring out later, and my father gives me a drill and a Dremel, which I'll be using for some finishing work. So I use the box cutter to cut a small hole in it, and I use the reciprocating saw to cut through it. My dad, this is where he comes in and gives me the bright idea to use a drill, which is actually a pretty good idea, around the edge, which basically gives me a dotted line to follow. So while he's getting the drill bits, I end up putting the 2 buckets together, figuring out where the nozzle attachment will go, marking it out, and just drawing it out on the bucket and set it aside for later. So now I end up cleaning up a little bit, and my father comes down with an extension cord and all the drill bits so that I can get to work doing this. He plugs it in, I chuck the drill bit in, shows me how it works, not that I already didn't know, and I go to work punching the holes through. He brings in a smaller stool so I'm not arching my back too much because I have some pretty bad back problems, but that's besides the point. So I'm punching out holes, punching out holes, punching out holes, punching out holes, and I take the reciprocating saw and cut out the bottom. I noticed that the holes are too small for the blade to go through, so I cut some more so that it can have just some reliefs for the blade to go in case I need to stop. And I end up cutting out the entire bottom of the hole, and I notice there's some burrs, so I grab the reciprocating saw and some sandpaper, go to work, and this is taking a while. I use the reciprocating saw for some bigger pieces that I missed, and I notice there's a lot of dust, so I plug in my shop vac and just suck it all up so that I'm not stepping on basically tiny Legos. And once I'm done cleaning up, I go back to work sanding and cutting off the bigger chunks, and this takes a while. It probably would have taken me a few hours to do. This entire project only took me about an hour and a half, at least building it. Testing it took another hour or so. And recording this video has actually taken a few, maybe 3-4 hours. So about here, I believe my father comes in. And nope, that'll be later. So yeah, I'm just sanding the edges here. And still using the reciprocating saw to take care of some of the bigger pieces. And here's where my father comes in, tells me we have a Dremel, and I'm like, okay, cool, so I'll do that. And what you see me doing here is I'm just cleaning up. And I take some sandpaper and I rough up the edge of the, actually no, here I am just punching out the holes for the nozzle attachment. And I go ahead and cut it open, and my father brings in the Dremel, shows me how it works, attaches a new bit to it, I fiddle with it, and I can't figure it out. He puts the new bit in, and he finally figures out remembers how it works, hands it off to me, and I go to town fixing the burrs on the inside of the bucket. I do this simply so that people don't get their hands scraped or it doesn't tear through the fabric. Now I'm still doing some finishing work with sandpaper to fix any burrs left behind by the Dremel or anything that I just didn't get. And then eventually I get to where I'm happy. There's a lot of dust, so I go to the shop vac and clean it up again. And then I move on to the little hole. My dad comes in and asks me what I'm doing for like the 4th time in a row. And I just go ahead and continue on. He gives me a smaller drill bit, and I do basically the same procedure as I did with the bottom of the first bucket for the nozzle attachment. And I'm just punching holes, and I wanted to use the box cutter just because I felt it would be better, but I ended up using the reciprocating saw to cut out the nozzle attachment simply because it was faster. Right here I'm removing the handle from the bottom bucket just so it doesn't get away. I bend it all the way to one side, was able to get it out, and then it was easy to get the other side out. Just blow out any burrs or plastic in it, just make sure it's not covered up. And then I'm using the reciprocating saw to cut out the rest of the hole. Using the Dremel to size the hole up and just checking it with the nozzle of the vacuum, and it finally fits in pretty snugly. Cleaning out any burrs, and then I go ahead and grab my canvas material. This is basically painting canvas. I go ahead and mark out where I want it to be with a Sharpie. I try to cut out with these very dull scissors. I go get some sharper ones, and I cut out a square that's very big and fits nicely over the end of the bucket. So I'm using 4 zip ties all together, basically like a hose clamp. You could have used a hose clamp, but I decided against it because I had these, and it fits very snugly together. And I switch it around so instead of sucking air, it blows air out, and I check it, and I press it together very snugly, and they end up actually getting stuck, which is fine. I was going to seal them together. That's why you saw me sand the outside edge of one of the buckets. I grabbed this blue painter's tape, which is really the MVP of this project. I'll show you why. I put it in a barbell to try and separate them. It doesn't work, so I'm fine with that. I'm just checking the porousness of the material there, and I end up taping the edge of the nozzle to give a snug fit. Stick it in, turn it on, and checking to see where the leaks are, and there are a few leaks where the 2 buckets are attached, which is fine. I expected that. That's why I grabbed some sealer, and I'm fiddling with this around, and I can't seem to figure out how it works because I've never used any of this. I just knew I needed some. And by the way, this is all built on my own design. I had some inspiration from some other videos of how they work and some ideas, but I designed this entirely by myself, and I ended up building this most entirely by myself without any help. So my dad comes down, he finally figures out what's wrong with the caulk gun, and ends up getting it open so I can start sealing it. And I used the blue painter's tape to lay down like a little platform so that none of the caulking gets on the floor and I can't get it up. And so while I seal around the edges of the bucket, I use painter's tape to hold it in place so that it doesn't get on the ground. And I just basically finish up doing this. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to record any of my testing of it, but I can tell you how it went. So originally I just dumped the sand in the bucket, attached the nozzle, and turned on the air. And it ended up working. The only problem is sand ended up flying everywhere no matter how much I had in it. So I used some of the canvas material to act as like a barrier on the nozzle, and it didn't let enough air in. So I used a bunch of different materials, this pillowcase material, t-shirt, socks, this face towel, and none of them worked. They either let too much air in or not enough air in. So I ended up taking pantyhose and doubling it up 9 times, and that ended up working the best out of anything I had. Unfortunately, my shop vac only has an on and off setting. It doesn't have like a speed 1, speed 2, speed 3. It only has on and off, so that was just slightly unfortunate. But it ends up working out alright and well. The only unfortunate thing is the shop vac is very loud as well as powerful. So sorry for your tinnitus. I already have tinnitus, so I can't really say that I'm sad, but that's it. Project done, and I just leave it to set, and you guys see the finished product.